CAPSI podcast series, Conversations on African Philanthropy.
Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to this episode in Conversations with Jacqueline Asiimwe. My name is Beginkos Moyo. I'm the Director of the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment, based here at the Wits Business School. We are so excited today to be joined by Jackie. Jackie is currently the Director of CivSource based in Uganda, but they do have operations also here in South Africa, and Jackie is joined by colleagues Barbara and Q. I'm not sure if I'm leaving anyone here. Jackie and I have had several conversations. I think one of the memories that I have is of a conversation I had with Jackie earlier this year. We were attending a meeting in New York. And in that meeting, I got to know that CivSource is a philanthropy advisory service or a firm. And it came about because we were looking at issues of language, but also looking at the trends that philanthropy has taken over a couple of years. And as Jackie was speaking, it quickly dawned on us that actually what you are doing is philanthropy advisory. And subsequent to that, we then had a webinar, which was arranged by the Alliance magazine, where we were talking again about issues of context, issues of language, but also the need for understanding that the vehicles on philanthropy, they keep changing. Some are new, some are old. But depending on where you are likely to view something as new, whereas that which you see as new actually has been practiced everywhere and elsewhere, just that you did not call it, or you did not give it a name, or you did not practice it yourself. So issues of endowments, for example, if you think about endowments and how endowments have been presented to us, they appear as if they are Western concepts. But if I ask each and every one of you about your villages around the concept of granaries, you go harvesting, and then you put this amount of harvest for continuity or for sustainability. That's the concept behind an endowment. If we think about issues about resilience around the issues of climate change, again, you would think that the new techniques that are brought about by these big institutions are actually new. But if you go back to the way in which we were brought up, we were drying our own food, everything. And that has been commercialized now and termed and given new names. So the concept around philanthropy advisory is something that all of us actually do. It's just that we don't identify ourselves as advisors. But Jackie and the team have actually become very brave and said, we are philanthropy advisors. And that's a big leap. That's a big step to actually take, especially if you are doing that from an African context, where from the very beginning, you must do twice or three times more than what others do from the Western part of the world. But secondly, because we are also seen as people who are receiving all the time. In terms of philanthropy, Africa has been projected as receivers. So how can receivers advise the ones that give? That's always something that is thrown into people that venture into this. But Jackie does not just do the advisory with a team. Jackie also walks a lot. In that conversation in New York, I sat down with Jackie and we started talking about our hobbies, and we realized we both like walking. And I asked Jackie, what are you walking for? Is it for health or what? What are you working for? So Jackie and I are going to be talking about this because I think for me it's fascinating to actually have Jackie here. I happened to sit with Jackie as well in Zanzibar, where we actually went through the work that CivSource is doing. And when I met Jackie last week, she said to me, I'm in town. Why don't... So I mentioned to her that on Friday we have her episode going up, and she said, I'll be in town. Why don't we do something together? And this is how the idea around Jackie's coming to speak to us today came from. That instead of Letu and the team publishing her episode, we have Jackie here. Let her publish her episode herself. So that's what she's going to be talking. So Jackie, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you so much, Vicky.
I think what the room is waiting to hear eagerly is this thing around who grew you. And that could say so many things. So who grew you as a person, but also who grew you as the philanthropy advisor, who also grew you as CivSource. So maybe we can take the time to speak about that. I know you have prepared some slides. Maybe we listen to, take us through your presentation, and then thereafter we'll have a conversation with the audience.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Okay, I was going to say South Africans don't greet back. Anyhow, I'm so honored to be here in South Africa. I hope I can stand and walk and okay. The reason I use this title, Who Grew You? If you've ever been in school, you know that there are these students who are constantly at the head teacher's office for having done something or the other. Do we know of those students? Were we those students? No. First, were you those students? It's okay to confess. None of you.
I think I could just
yeah, so in Uganda, when you're called into the head teacher's office again and again and again, at some point they ask you, who grew you? And they ask it in a sense, there must be a design flaw somewhere because, and so I wanted us to try it here. And where is I need to start the thing. You see, the head teachers in Uganda might not be the same as South Africa. You have to lower your glasses all the way to the tip of your nose. So those of us with glasses right now, please lower them all the way. Turn to your neighbor and just ask, who grew you? And or as our Nigerian say, your father and your mother. So when I think about who grew me in terms of my journey or our journey as CivSource as philanthropy advisors, I have to take you way back when. Once upon a time, long ago. As Becky was saying, so my career first started out in civil society, in the women's rights space as an activist, going on the streets, championing rights of all kinds, going to courts, going to parliament, doing legal legislative advocacy, doing all those things. That's where I was grown. In terms of my experience of donors as a civil society activist then, it was top bottom. It was whenever there was mention that a donor was coming, you cleaned for days because should they find a speck of dust, oh my goodness, they could retract your grant. Not dust, but it was just you reorganized yourselves in a certain way to present yourselves in a certain way, because if they found a flaw, they would retract their money. The way we experienced donors was that they knew all things. So indeed, as Becky said, if you're going to be an advisor of a person who knows all things, never. At that time, remember, I'm taking you back, way back in time. At that time, donors were in hierarchy of fear. After God, fear your donor. Because that's how that sort of power was presented in that space. In Uganda, maybe here it was different, maybe in other spaces in the continent, it was different. So that was the experience of how dealing with a donor was. At the time that I was growing up as a young activist, also there was only a certain layer in the organization that even spoke to the donor. Right? So already they were revered. You hear they're coming, you prepare yourselves, but you won't have access because they only talk to a certain level of the institution. The rest of you don't matter. You're not seen, you're not heard. Maybe you're seen as you greet the person, but otherwise don't talk to them, right? And so there was this concept of my donor. And literally, when the executive director left, they left with their donors, and then you have to cultivate new relationships all over again. So that's the context in which I was grown. So you can imagine, fast forward, so my career trajectory, starting out in civil society, I did a brief stint in government and quickly learned that I was not meant for government work. And then I transitioned onto the donor side. And therefore, when I was working in a donor project, I mirrored the behavior I had seen. Because that's when there's no school, when there's no space to go to teach you what to do, you do from what you have been taught. And so I literally remember going into the field to visit our partners, telling them a week in advance, or sometimes just springing up on them, because in your mind, and I feel sad when I say this, I don't even say it with joy, you want to see the fear in your eyes. They must understand the power that you carry. I'm truly serious. That is how, because that is what I had experienced, right? That this is a relationship of fear. It's a relationship of power. You don't know. They know all things. They can tell you what to do. They can take their money when they are not happy with you. You can never say you've made mistakes, because how dare you make a mistake? That's how we grew. So when we went out to see partners, one, you must fear me. Two, I am coming to shame you, because I might tell you all the things you're doing wrong. I must. So that's what we were doing. In fact, I think I said in that meeting that Becky references in New York, that I think I owe people an apology, because I didn't know better, because I was grown in a certain soil, right? So yeah, I remember there's a partner that I even went to visit with a policeman, because we were going to arrest him. Because yes, they had, misappropriated money, but yeah, I must show my power, right? So when I left, thankfully, when I left that donor space, I then went to now work with a firm that was doing things totally different. So you can imagine, I was a tangled mess, because I know one way to do power as a donor, one way to present, one way to interact with civil society is that you must show. And then I work with an organization, another donor, who is working differently. And the reason why spaces like CAPSI, like what they're teaching us, are very important, the reason why we need advocates and activists in the philanthropy and donor space, is to teach people to do different. So for me, it was a 360. One of the critical lessons that I learned, and in undoing how I had been grown, was absolute humility. And I think for me, that is the first lesson that I had to confront as a donor advisor, to say, I truly don't know, to understand the limits of my knowledge. Because yes, while we call ourselves advisors, which ordinarily one would think, so you know all things, that's why we come to you for advice. No, one must also constantly be aware of the limits of their knowledge, and not just aware, therefore be willing to truly listen and learn. Because now there are many African philanthropists, philanthropy advisors on this continent. The field is growing, the field is widening, it's deepening. So there are many more of us. And we have access in ways probably some civil society organizations don't, or some civil society actors. So when we're in that space, we must truly, so one, you are trusted, your knowledge, your awareness, your words are trusted, but you must also be careful, therefore, what you say, how you present your colleagues, your country, your continent. So those are the kinds of things that I have been learning as I try to untangle these things that had been tangled in because I was grown in certain ways of dealing with the donor space. I think the other thing that I have quickly learned also is, as African philanthropy advisors, we must be clear about our politics. And by that, I mean, who do you truly serve at the end of the day? Who are you accountable to? Because the donor appoints you, but civil society has no say in who actually the advisors are. And so I think it's an office, a position that carries a lot of responsibility, and we must be absolutely sure to whom we are accountable at the end of the day. And for me, that is my people, my continent, my movements here, because the donor advice is so that they can work together to actually enable communities to thrive, to grow, to be, and do better. And so those are some of the things that I have learned along the way. Truly to understand my responsibility, to be aware of, understand and name my politics, be humble, know the extent of my knowledge, be willing to learn. We've had some successes along the way, for which I am both proud and to have contributed to, but also humbled when I stand back, and when I was even preparing for this, as wow, and the story is not told enough, I think. So just as an example of the things that we have done as we play the advisory role at CivSource, we have been able to enable the unlocking of resources, because as a philanthropy advisor, you're able to see, notice certain gaps, and so able to say, how about you mobilize your resources for this particular cause, or these particular issues, or this particular community. There's a fund that we enabled to happen in Uganda. It was called the Capacity Building Fund. And this was particularly to support nascent disability organizations, not just nascent disability organizations, but also nascent disability issues in Uganda, which were at that point not yet funded. And so, but being able to do that was because we were walking journeys with disability organizations, giving advice to the donor, and then recognizing there's this space. How about we fill it and find funding for it? We also were able to convince some donors to put together another fund called the Uganda Human Rights Fund, I believe. And this was particularly to support the queer community in Uganda. We were able to seed certain organizations, one of which is Chapter 4, one of the famous civil liberties organizations in Uganda. Again, it was noticing a gap. Of course, we do the research and everything, but to say this might be a niche area. And Chapter 4 has gone on to do amazing work in the civil liberties field in Uganda and in East Africa. So it's things like those, or recognizing that you're funding this, but this, how about we bring these communities together, or these issues together? How about we, and so just making those connections, I think for me has been one of the beautiful benefits of doing advisory work in our country and in our context. And when I think about how to even summarize what has been for me my heartthrob, my heartbeats. Before I get to that even though we've walked a journey of about 6 years now, and a few when I was just a single consultant as an advisory consultant, there's so much more to do. And part of the so much more we are thinking of is, like Becky said, there are so many philanthropists on our continent. How about we start doing, or one of our dreams is to start doing advisory services for them, not because they don't know the continent, but sometimes truly people need ideas, need to ideate so that they can most efficiently deploy their philanthropic resources. So that's one of the things we want to do. The other thing which we attempted, but we need to pick up our bootstraps again and try it again. Like I said, the field is growing. One of the things we wanted to do in Uganda was to create a community of practice among philanthropy advisors, because we're not the only ones. Several donors have their own individual consultants. And so we wanted to convene a community to say, don't struggle alone. Let's learn together, because I know we were all grown from the same soil. And I can't speak for the others. I guess we each do our own unraveling, or maybe some people are set in that cement, right? So how can we learn together, grow together, teach each other, and maybe even advocate for each other? Because while we advocate for communities, who advocates for African philanthropy advisors? And how about we come together to do that? Maybe to raise our voice on certain issues that we face as a community. So there's so much more to do. And I think the other field that we are trying to get into is even advising community philanthropy associations. In Uganda, at least, they're still quite nascent. And so again, it's going in, not that we know, but we've walked a journey. How about we walk together? When I think about my work in this field, this is one of my very, very good friends in the queer community in Uganda. He's a leading queer activist in Africa. I met him 10 years ago, being in a room facilitating a meeting for one of the partners of the donors that we were doing philanthropy advisory work for. And I don't know what struck me about this person, but we became friends, and such deep friends. It's a relationship that has happened over 10 years. And about a week or two before I came to South Africa, I had dinner with him. He invited me for dinner, and he said he is writing his story, and he wants me to write the foreword. And that I cried. It broke my heart, not in a bad way, but to say, if it wasn't for this work. And so for me, that is the things that money can't buy. The deep friendships, relationships, gravitas that we have gained from working as a philanthropy advisor in our space. And so it takes me back now to who is growing us. It's truly our community. It's communities created by people like Capsi, by platforms like the podcast. It's truly creating or being grown by community. That is who is now growing me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jackie. And I don't know if colleagues, those of us wear glasses, there was something ironic about what Jackie did. So when she said do this, immediately I realized I can't see. Yeah. And of course, those headmistresses are asking that question because if they could see, they would be able to tell who grew you. So when they do that, they can't see it all. So that's something that was very ironic. But the second thing, Jackie, is that I think we need a masterclass. Jackie told us at one point that when something marvelous has happened, we all have to say it in a particular format. Maybe we need to just do that. How do you
Really, but
yeah.
really,
let's just do it.
really.
Yeah.
So in Uganda, when something has been amazing, they say, how was it? You even have to beat your thighs and do the face pain. Otherwise, you can't say, no.
So thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you so much. But also, you wrote after your Cape Town trip.
Yes.
You wrote that you went jogging, and then you were in this road that reminded you of the journey that you had taken. I just thought that was really interesting. Maybe you want to restate that because I think it it delves in very well with what you have just said around who grew you. But that road, when you were jogging in Cape Town, it's back to the question, what are you jogging for? Or what are you working for? So I would want you to maybe speak also to issues of leadership and how the walking has actually helped you to propel that gospel.
To propel the gospel. So I started walking every day from last year, 1st September. And the reason I remember it is because there's a group in Uganda called Activate Uganda that does 100-day run or walk challenges. And the minimum you're required to do is just 3 kilometers a day for 100 days without stop, without fail, and then you get a medal. And so that's what I've been doing since last year. So every 100 days, we're now in our, I think, 4th 100 days. There's days in between that you can rest. I've chosen to still keep walking. So that's what one of the things Becky is referring to. And like he said, in the conversation that he and I had in New York, we talked about, because I'd started considering what else can I do with walking. I have finally now been consistent with my walking because I wanted to do a wellness practice consistently. I have that down. Now what else do I do? And I spoke to him. I also spoke to another Ugandan friend of mine called Joseph. He has been walking for road safety since COVID times, coming out of a health scare on his 45th birthday, and his father died when he was 45 years of age. He decided to do a walk from Kampala to his hometown in Bushenyi, which is 300 and something miles. It's a really long walk. But that was his way to celebrate his father, to celebrate the fact that he had regained his health. And so when I was thinking about how can I lend my walking to a cause, I thought maybe I should walk with Joseph and do road safety things. But is road safety really my issue? No, but so I combined the conversation with Becky and with Joseph to say, okay, what am I really truly passionate about? I'm passionate about connecting, about conversations, and about leaders. And so on June 2nd this year, started Walk, Talk, Connect. And it's really because I walk, or at that time used to walk an average of about 2 hours in the morning. So I said, this is time and space that I can offer to leaders to just have conversations. Truly, how are you? What leadership challenge are you dealing with? And let's talk it through as we walk. And to date, I've walked with 105 human beings, all across, not all across Uganda, some from Uganda, some actually from South Africa. So wherever I go, I lend my legs to walking with leaders, to have conversations, to walk, talk, and connect. So that's what I do. And the other day I was talking to a group of young people to say, we each have something. Because going back to how we are taught to give and to be generous, sometimes though the myth around that is if it's not money, I don't have much. But we each have something. And so I, for now in this season, using my legs to contribute to having conversations with leaders. And that led me most recently to consider the journeys that I have come. I don't know whether it's a fact of age, a fact of growing older, or of having older parents, but something for this season, I'm being very reflective about my journeys and who has walked with me, so who has grown me, who I am growing, and also unexpected roads. And one of them was precisely this conversation. When Becky and I recorded this conversation in Zanzibar, we did not know that the day it would be launched, I would be here. Hadn't planned that at all. But so my other reflection about journeys is the unexpected ones that are pleasant, that are surprising, that are intriguing, that are. So what journey are you on right now? Where is your road leading you or taking you? And just opening up to new ways of being generous.
Thank you. I think we can take a couple of questions from from the audience. Just a couple of questions because we don't want to keep you here that long. One of the things that CivSource and Jack and the team are doing also is, experimenting with a new style, or rather a different style of leadership, where at any given period of time, they rotate the position of a director, obviously without affecting some of the legal requirements on signing and all of that. But in terms of practice and people getting to understand how to lead an institution, they rotate, especially among the senior leadership. And so this 3 months could be Jackie, the next month could be Barbara, and so on. In fact, Jackie just told me that you've just returned back to your role. There was somebody else before her. I was telling you that I want to try it here at Kapsi, but
he fears you might throw him out, you managers.
But after hearing the story about people saying they will manage me,
not too sure anymore.
Okay, colleagues, let's see if there are any questions for Jackie. This was really to reflect on some of the journeys, but also this concept of, who is growing us, where are we coming from? Because it really shapes the kind of, the way we turn out to be out there, but also more importantly, in terms of how we practice philanthropy. Any inputs, questions? Okay. I don't know, do they need a mic or anything? No. Okay, just go for it, Melody.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jackie, for the conversation. It's quite interesting. So from what you're saying, I became interested in one of the issues that we were raising about community philanthropy associations. So my question was on your interactions with them. What are the main challenges or opportunities that they face compared to the other type of philanthropy?
At least in Uganda, and again, when we think about our continent, I think often we need to remember that we have different histories, different and similar, right? Histories, socio-political realities, and also economies, right? So think about all of that when I talk about community philanthropy associations in Uganda. The ones that we journeyed with last year were ones that have, of course, they are utilizing and raising money from their neighbors and relatives and friends to do something in their community. So we first prefaced our interactions with them with a study to find out who are they, what do they do, what kinds of issues do they convene around as community philanthropy associations, and then what might they need, what support might they need. So the three things that we journeyed with them for over the year was how to better raise resources, because yes, they are, but how what more? When I look around, so some of it was how else can we map community resources, or even just how do we know about government projects? Because we often know that, there are often government projects that are happening in communities. If communities don't know that money, I don't know where it goes, but so sometimes it's just linking them to potential opportunities, either with the Ministry of Community Development or with, whoever it is or Ministry of Gender, Children's Affairs, Education. So around the issues that they are dealing with, what possible government opportunities in terms of resources can one add? Some of it was just telling their stories, because it was like, if we didn't come to look for you, if we weren't interested, how does one know about the work that you're doing? And so trying to, and not even for the external party, but even within your community association, how do you tell your community what you're doing? And so just very simple work around communications. How do you tell your story? So we worked with a communications firm to workshop storytelling with the community associations. And finally was around bookkeeping. So just very, you're doing great. Ours was all good. What are the things we can tweak? But also the other beauty was And do you know that there's also another community association in the next village or in the next? So how do we also create a community of community associations so that they get to know each other and can bounce off ideas or learn from each other? And very amazingly, I think about a month ago, one of them actually held a fundraising event that we were able to go to and take the other community associations. We were able to give 2 scholarships to 2 of them to come to the Zanzibar meeting. So it's really, you know, how do we also avail them opportunities that they didn't have before, but when they lock into, can then help propel their associations even further.
Yeah. Okay. Any other question? Oh, okay.
Sorry, I'm just interested in terms of your walk, and I like how you call it walk, talk, connect. Are there specific topics, or just does it depend on the person who you're with? Would you try and influence?
So no, it's literally who are you and what do you want us to talk about? But I've started to, so certain themes have come around. It's interesting that a lot of the people I've worked with are founders. And so just dealing with founder questions and issues and challenges, or people who want to start something but are afraid to start. And so it's been interesting having those conversations, and my mind is working about, are there particular needs? Is there a service that we can start to provide to founders of any kind, whether it is nonprofit, for whoever, but founders have been, or founding organizations and things has been a almost consistent conversation. That's the one that I can pick out from the walks that I've had. Yeah, founders, founding, the challenges around, getting stuff together, getting people to trust you, getting, what do you do with your fears? Putting teams together, how do you deal with people? Because we are difficult to deal with. Yeah, just everyday, regular founder issues. Yeah.
I mean, what Jackie hasn't warned people is that normally he walks at 5:30 in the morning.
Only. At least I don't walk at 4 a.m.
So I actually had the honor of working with Jackie and Sally.
Yes.
And our work focused on resource mobilization.
Yes, it did.
In terms of, you know, I mean, all of us who are leaders of institutions, if there's one thing that keeps us awake, is how do we keep these institutions afloat? Where do we go for, you know, to mobilize the resources and etc. So that at least was our conversation. I know you had a work with Tendai, and your work with Tendai was around, you know, the founding question around setting up an institution and building it over time to what it has become. I saw a hand there, Joseph.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for the presentation or the conversation. Out of interest, I just want to ask something. How difficult is it to advance philanthropy for the Ugandan queer community, especially considering that the government does not offer any substantial support to the queer community, and also in line with the anti-homosexuality bill?
There's also a minister of
ethics and integrity. Yes. Yeah, and he tells us how long our dresses should be. So our dresses should be, you know, because there was a miniskirt law, remember, in Uganda, I tell you. And so we protested, get your eyes off my behind. So regarding the queer community, one of the things we have wanted to do as CivSource, so one of the things that we share with CAPSI is storytelling. We too have a podcast community. It's called Community, because we like to tell stories of giving with, by, to, from African communities. One of the communities whose stories I have desired to tell is of the queer community. And why? Because often it is cast as a community in need, right? That their role is just to receive. And yet, you know that you cannot be part of a queer community if it isn't the generosity. Some of these movements on our continent are literally held together by generosity. If you think of refugee communities, if you think of persons with disability, if you think of, so part of what we do, and one of the things we are documenting right now is generosity among market women. So for us, it's telling those unlikely stories, people who you'd think they are always the ones on the receiving end. No, there's such a history and a legacy of generosity that they have had to feed each other, to clothe each other. When queer parents, parents of queer children, disown them, deny them education, queer communities come together and their friends, their allies, to keep queer children in school. And all of that happening with or without donor money, with or without government money is never going to happen. So I would like to first tell that story of the generosity that is happening all day, every day. When queer people have to flee, unfortunately, from laws like ours, they land in other countries where they also lean on the generosity of queer communities in those places where they've gone. So my true desire is first to tell their story before we even think about, so what does access to resources mean for them? Now, in Uganda, the funds they can access from government are through Ministry of Health, but only to the extent that they are seen as a disease vector, right? And so maybe Ministry of Health may have a most at-risk populations program, but that's to provide condoms or to provide. We see the community as people that pass on disease, so we don't want to get their disease, so let's have a program where we don't get the diseases, right? So if you're only going to locate me as a disease vector, that's the only money you're going to avail me, if at all. Moreover, it may not even come to me, right? As a queer person or queer community. So it's not about to happen, but despite legislation like the Anti-Homosexuality Act, there's generosity that's happening in that community. Yeah. And I wish we could tell the stories in a way that also is safe and secure for them, of course. And maybe it doesn't even have to be CivSource, actually. How can they tell their stories of generosity in safe ways? Yeah.
Okay, I think we could stop with the questions here unless there's someone with a burning question. If not, if not, Jackie, there's Judy Kamanyi who says, what drives you and keeps you going as a leader?
Oh my goodness. And Judy is my former boss. I worked at Action for Development, which she led as the CEO, and I worked there as a legal and human rights officer. And so what keeps me going? Gratitude. And the ways I have tried to show gratitude, speaking about the roads and the people that have grown me, is that I am absolutely grateful for those that grew me the right way. And I know that Judy has come to 2 events that have convened, one of women in my life. So when I was about, 42 years old, I convened 40 women in my life from all, my aunts, my former bosses, my colleagues, it was a cross-section of women, but it was to say thank you, that I am the person that I am because of those who grew me, because of the journeys that they enabled me take. So that's one of the things that keeps me going as a leader. Absolute gratitude and community. If I didn't have friends to check on me, friends to provide space for my voice, for my passions, friends to hold me up when things are falling apart. So gratitude and community for me are the things that keep me going as a leader.
And then there's a question from Shamima, who says, are local philanthropic organizations open to advice and dialogue? I find that many here in South Africa are closed to consultants wanting to share value. Your thoughts?
Well, I don't know that I can speak for the breadth and length of local organizations, maybe, and like I said, when I talked about what more do we need to do as philanthropy advisors here on the continent, I think it's to, and one thing I've learned in this journey of philanthropy, it's really based on relationships. And so I think one might first need to build the relationships, because advice is also based on can I trust you? Can I trust what you're saying? Where are you taking me? Will you not deceive me? Will you not? Because I guess sometimes when you have money or you're managing money, maybe sometimes there's an instinct to first not trust. So opening this palm to even say, okay, come and see who I am, come and see my insights, come and see my struggles. Or it might also come from, but we know the money is ours. We know what to do. Who are you? Why do you think you can tell us what to do? And an advisor doesn't tell. They ideate with you. So I think it is growing these relationships with local philanthropists and truly partnering in a co-learning journey.
Okay. I think Your Excellencies and Honorables, this is the moment that we've been waiting for. We
There's no drum roll.
We feel very lucky to have Jackie here, publish the episode. And this is going to be a double episode, basically. So it's going to be a double episode, basically, because we've been recording this one. Yes. So it's going to go out today. But the idea was to then, ask Jackie to introduce the episode. So this has been the introduction to the episode that we shot in Zanzibar, where you will find a lot about what CivSource does, the successes, the challenges, the opportunities, but the journey that they've really traveled as an institution is actually detailed in that episode. And so we're going to, I don't know if the team wants to come and prepare for Jackie to do that. But secondly, I just thought about it now. So if I could invite the CivSource colleagues to just come and give Jackie some support.
Yes, that would be lovely.
So we have this philosophy in the office that if it's important and urgent, I do it. Mm-hmm. If it's important but not urgent, I will still do it, but later. If it's urgent but not important, I delegate.
Count down.
Count down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oops.
Welcome to yet another episode with me, Jacqueline Asiimwe, on the Conversations on African Philanthropy. I'm happy today to be joined by Jacqueline Asiimwe of CivSource Africa, based in Uganda. We are shooting this episode in partnership with the East Africa Philanthropy Network in the sidelines of the conference taking place in Zanzibar, Tanzania. Jackie, welcome.
Thank you, Becky.
And nice to have this opportunity to chat to you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. When the two of us met at the EGA conference earlier this year in New York, we had some conversations around, some of these things that we do in our spare time. And one of those is walking for you. How has that been going?
It's been going well. And I'm very glad that I had that conversation with you, because at the time, I had been walking for almost 4 or 5 months. And I had started to ask myself how I can use the walking more purposefully. Of course, its purpose is to get me active and to keep me physically active, but I wanted to add something. And so having the conversation with you and you telling me that you commit your running to the issue of SGBV, gender and sexual-based violence, started me down the path of asking what I could use my walks for.
Yeah.
In Uganda, there's a gentleman called Joe Walker. He walks for road safety. So I thought that I would join him because road safety is, a peripheral interest. But I also thought, is that really my thing?
Yeah.
And so it was also a journey of figuring out, if I do use walking as a way to give back, what was my thing?
Yeah.
And my thing is connecting with leaders. I'm passionate about leaders, passionate about growing leaders, passionate about leaders being well. And I know that oftentimes, being a leader myself, there's really no one who asks about how you really are, because somehow we have to have it all figured out, and yet we don't always.
Yeah.
And so I thought, let me commit my time to walk with leaders. And so it birthed Fridays with Jackie, which I launched on 2nd June a few weeks ago. And it's become a thing. I thought I would actually just keep it to Fridays. But the people that have signed up, I now literally walk with people about 3 days a week since then. So it became a thing, and thank you.
Wow.
And just the beauty of what can arise or emerge from conversation.
Yeah.
We just never know.
Yeah.
We just never know.
Yeah. In fact, let me just ask for some water so that we can demonstrate a point.
Yes.
So this thing, Kisima, we designed it because it's meant to be a well from which we drink to kind of deal with our thirst and all of that. And clearly, there are so many areas where we need to get some energy and some source. And one of them for you is walking.
Yeah.
For me is jogging. And you know, in one of the conversations, I think it's one of the episodes, I spoke to Ashley Green Thompson, and he had been doing marathons also for years and years, comrade marathons. And then I also said to him, what are you running for? He had never thought about it, and this year he actually used it to raise money for a school in Swaziland, Eswatini.
Yes.
So he did 87.7 kilometers to raise 87,000 rands for this school.
Wow.
He hasn't reached that target yet, but
yes.
but he has actually used it as a way to,
as a rallying point.
As a rallying point. So at times we do some of these things for health, but it has to be beyond health. Which takes me to a conversation about the work that you do in Uganda. Can we talk a bit about CivSource and what you do? Why did you find the need to establish it? You are the founder. Yeah.
So CivSource is formed out of a transition moment for somebody else. I was previously working with Wellspring Advisors LLC, which was a US-based firm that was supporting back-end donors to do their giving and providing advisory services. I started working with Wellspring Advisors as a consultant in 2009, and then in 2011 they established a Uganda office. So I headed their operations in Uganda, Wellspring Advisors Uganda, from 2011 up to about 2016. The conversation that started happening with the back-end donors was they were growing older, and part of what they wanted to do as they grew older was to ensure that when they could no longer, directly participate, and or that when the time came for them to pass on, that part of their money would be ring-fenced for all time for philanthropy. And so they started to morph into, or to think about morphing Wellspring Advisors into a philanthropy, into a foundation outfit. One of those questions and conversations became whether they wanted a foundation field office. So in fact, we did some research then and asked, the Ford Foundation East Africa, OSEA, and a few other donors that had field offices. But for very many reasons, they decided they didn't want a field office, and so had to wind down Wellspring Advisors Uganda, but gave me an opportunity to start something. In my mind then, it was merely to still continue their work, although they said, and you have the opportunity to do what you want to do. And so CivSource was born in 2017, and we spent 2018 thinking, what do we want to do? And that gave us the three things that we talk about, which is influence philanthropy, build strength, which is our leadership work, because I'm passionate about leaders, and then shape narrative, because until then, having worked mostly in the nonprofit space and then crossed over to the donor space, I really truly hadn't heard conversations about African philanthropy. And yet, being a Ugandan-raised, Ugandan-born girl from a prelate's home, my father is an Anglican priest, he's now retired, I literally knew that my life is a sum total of all the generosities I experienced. And I started to ask myself, how come I've never heard that side of the story?
Yeah.
So when we say shaping philanthropy, it's really starting to look at, to value, to name, to explore, to research the ways in which giving is done. Because for now, the story that is mostly told is of the West giving to the rest.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's our shaping philanthropy work. So those are the three things broadly that we do.
Yeah.
Many things
Yeah.
under there, but
Yeah.
influencing philanthropy, building strength, and shaping narrative.
Yeah. I mean, when you were at that panel in at the ECAC conference, I
Yes.
actually said to you, this is for the first time that I understand that you are a philanthropy advisor.
Mm-hmm.
All along, I thought you were an outfit that did research and all of that. And this concept of philanthropy advisors is usually a concept that probably it does not really resonate in the African continent.
Mm-hmm.
When we hear about advisors, we're probably thinking of family offices, we're thinking of banks and all of that. And yet in the US and elsewhere, this is something that almost everyone does. And so
Yes.
some of us end up running to firms in the US for philanthropic advice.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe let's talk a bit about this whole notion of philanthropy advisors in Africa and the extent to which you've kind of penetrated the space. And do you see many other institutions coming up to do that? Because currently you are probably focused predominantly in Uganda, but I can tell you now that the need for philanthropy advice across the
beyond
continent
Uganda,
is
yes.
really big, because donors come in, they want to do something, but they probably don't know how to do it. Secondly, they might not know the context which they are operating in, the culture, and somebody has to interpret that. And there are very few institutions that do the work that you do. So maybe let's pay some attention to that concept and see the extent to which it can be grown in the continent.
So firstly, it wasn't until AGAG and that particular panel that I started to think more deeply about my work. And in fact, I've been reflecting about how I can write about it.
Yeah.
Because as I explained, yes, while the term may be there, in my mind, I don't know that it has even settled as a field of practice, because I saw myself firstly as a consultant of an LLC who was supporting back donors. So maybe in my mind, I was 3 times removed. But also when Wellspring Uganda was being wound down, and then as CivSource, we take on, as part of our philanthropy support infrastructure, we take on the nomenclature advisor. I think it was more for me an extension of what I had been doing, right?
Yeah.
And I guess we don't really sit in it and think about it as such, because again, I'm advising. Yes, but this is home. I know home, right? If I come to visit you and you show me this is where the kitchen is, you're showing me home. You're showing me the familiar, but it's familiar to you, and I don't know that the role you're playing for me. So I think it's interesting that it has even taken me that long for that to evolve in my mind, but also because traditionally, most donors, flew in, did their thing, flew out. Advisors, I think maybe it shows even a shift in understanding of the role that people in a different context play for donors that are not of our context. So I think it's also a field that is growing and can be indeed, as you said, grown even further. So I'm grateful for that conversation, because then it's making me sit with, what does this mean? And lastly, I did explain in that conversation that it's new because when most of us land on the donor side of things, it's almost sadly a place of arrival because you have a certain different power.
Yeah.
You have resources you never had before in a different context, in the non-profit context.
Yeah.
And so you're no longer struggling with the things your colleagues were struggling with. And I think if not worn well, that can come with very toxic ways of doing work. And so if you've come from toxic ways of doing work and now you're an advisor, it's very easy to carry this sense of I know and they don't, and I'm the one anyway advising. I have access to these people that need my advice. So it's really, and like you said, there is no school, right? You don't go to learn these things. So it's an interesting mindset shift. It's a heart set shift, but it's also recognizing that there is value indeed in advisory work. And it's valuable because we are providing context, we are interpreting our culture, we are availing our contacts, because many times it is who do you know that, and so we are availing that time. And I did add one other thing. I think a lot of the work that we do is also care. Because when donors leave, you're left with broken hearts, and who's going to talk to that leader? Or in situations like ours where there are many political upheavals, legal upheavals, suddenly people's bank accounts are closed, organizations' bank accounts are closed, or protests are broken up, right? You're the one appearing with bail money, you're the one trying to figure out how to get your colleagues to safe places, you're the one, there's all this work that is unseen as you also carry the tag of advisor. So it's many things in one. And I truly, the short and the long, it's an interesting space and place. And I think we need to think about it more and write about it more, talk about it more.
Yeah, but also even professionalize it. So
yes,
one of the things that you have just said, which made me go back a couple of steps and think, is that most of us running different institutions and wanting to fundraise in the US, for example, have had to go to the US to engage philanthropy advisors, whether individual giving, foundations, otherwise, for the very reason that they actually know the place, they've got the connections, they know the culture. And so they've charged us to actually do that, right? And it's an accepted profession that you've got so many advisory firms in philanthropy that all of us who are from outside the US would go to, either to ask them to help us set up, friends of CivSource or friends of CAPSI, help them to receive the grants on our behalf because they've got the facilities and all of that, but also help us just connect with the donor community in the US. So it's the same. If now donors are coming here and saying we want to support in Africa, but we don't know the culture, we don't know the networks, we actually don't know how to do it, can you help us? And that's what you are actually doing. So I think it's important for us to maybe find ways of even professionalizing it and even saying it more loudly in terms of what we are doing. And then that way it could equalize some of the narratives in this space. But you also are very strong on the issue of context. In the recent webinar that we did for the Alliance magazine, focusing on new vehicles in philanthropy, you and I kept insisting that context matters. Why is that important in your case? And also in terms of the relations that you have developed with partners on the ground, as well as the donors that you're advising?
The analogy I've thought of is if customer is king, context is queen. Because it's and context is not just place. Context is histories. Context is laws and governance structures in a particular place. Context is language. It's many things, and unless one is awake to the fact that that matters, and that I cannot, so it takes, in fact, people being humble that they don't know everything. I think context reminds us to be humble.
Yeah.
Context reminds us we do not know all things. Context, I hope, keeps us curious, right? Just as an example, CivSource Africa, now in its 5th year, coming to 6th, registered in South Africa. But we knew that working in a different, we couldn't come, you know, just because we had 4 years in our belt saying, now we know it, we know what to do, let's jump into a different, no. You start to understand that you need to, context means relationships, right? So we need to understand, how is it done here? What is done here? Who is the right person to know, and how do we know them? How do we start to be known? How do we embed ourselves? What is the culture? What is the, when they say now in South Africa, do they mean now? Do they mean later? But not, you know, it's all those things. It's really navigating life in my view. So I think in order to be relevant, responsive, if that is what we truly want our philanthropy to be, you cannot, context is what mediates that for you.
So now that's a good way for us to talk about some of the stories and some of the research that you've been doing. I think, you know, for me, I think you're one of the few groups that managed to actually go out to communities and document the different forms of philanthropy. And so if somebody wanted to know, how does giving look like in Uganda, you are the place to go to, because you have documented that. Are there any specific trends or specific features that you want to highlight in terms of the work that you've been doing, documenting the different forms of philanthropy, especially from communities? What are those different trends or traits that you would say philanthropy in Uganda looks like this?
I wish I could. I don't know that we're there yet. I think it's still a journey and we're getting there. So indeed, as you've said, we've done a 5-district study of giving practices. We did 5 volumes of generosity during a time of COVID. We've done a research on community foundations and what that might look like in our context. We've done a brief, really light touch study on corporate giving, because also giving is multifaceted. We're truly trying to, I think we're still at the beginnings of understanding before we say, and therefore equals X in Uganda. And so I'm not sure I can even answer that as yet. Although we did contract somebody to help us look through those 5 volumes of the giving during the time of COVID to say, for now, what meaning can we make of this? And the part of the meaning from that was, it truly does happen all day, every day. I think if I can, just 3 things that which then formed the theme of our first gathering of givers: count, account, recount. So the counting was, CivSource is one organization. We can't tell all the stories that there are of giving in a small country, yet vast, like Uganda. So number one, and I think we've been trying to figure out, how do we actually aggregate the giving that is there? I was sitting beside a young lady in this conference here this morning, and she's new to philanthropy. She's just joined a family foundation in Kenya. And so she was telling me, you know, yesterday, one of the things that resonated with her was about how there are local resources and we don't have to be dependent on the West. And I said, I even question that narrative. The reason why we assume we are dependent on the West is because we can literally put a figure to what they've given. And I said, we haven't yet cracked how to count all the giving, because maybe indeed if we had a figure, we would actually realize we're not as dependent as we think. But just because our end doesn't have that dollar amount, that shilling amount. And so for organizations like ours, we've been thinking, is it working with, you know, the Ministry of Statistics? Like to start embedding a question on, do you give and how much, to the extent people are able to tell that. So for us, we haven't yet cracked it, and therefore we can't even yet tell, therefore what, right? So how do we crack the counting story? The accounting is the telling. Even when we started to put these stories together, people were shy. They were like, I can't, my left hand is not supposed to know what my right hand. And I was like, yeah, but how can we know what people's right hands give?
Yeah.
How did we get sucked into this? And yes, we do understand and respect people's, religious or other reasons for those kinds of things. And so we started to say, okay, you don't have to tell yours, but maybe Becky, your neighbor, who gave, and you can say, I know Becky's story. He's a giver, right?
Yeah.
So to be even comfortable, for people to even get comfortable, for us to gather those stories has been a journey, partly because people haven't seen what they do as giving, because it's so part of our context, we don't see it.
Yeah.
So it was to say, no, this too is giving, it's valuable, and it's worth telling. So that is a continuous journey. Yeah. And then the account is, when all is said and done, how do we aggregate this to start seeing it as contributing to national development?
Yeah.
See it as part of our GDP when we count the monies, right? And all those kind of things. How do we bring it into the formal ways of what accounting for contributions look like? So it is still a journey.
Yeah.
And maybe one day, 20 years from now, when we have this conversation, I'll be able to answer that question.
Yeah, and it's understandable. I mean, the study of philanthropy and this research in the continent is very much nascent. And so even if we try to compare it with the US or the European regions, they've been doing this over years. And so that's why it's easy for their philanthropy to dominate, even from a narrative point of view. But over time, this is going to change. I also wanted to talk to you a bit about your role in the governance and leadership of the East Africa Philanthropy Network. I mean, we are here at the conference, and the attendance is just massive. The environment is dynamic. The conversations are interesting. It hasn't been like this all the time. So there's clearly some growth in the way in which the network has done its things. Can we talk about some of the things that you personally, as the chair, have identified and made your mission during this time when you are the chair, and how those in ways are dear to you? So that's one from personally as the chair. Chairs always want to shape the agenda in one or two ways, but also the network as a whole. What are the things that it cares about, which has brought you to where you are today?
So interesting that you say that. I think again, we're very new to this space. One of the things that we did as CivSource, because we're literally opening doors in 2017, using 2018 to develop our strategy, and then starting 2019 to say, ta-da, here we are in the world. So 2019 is when we attend our very first EAPN conference, which was in Arusha, I still remember. And the new kid on the block, we had just started curating proverbs, African proverbs on generosity. We had, and so, we appeared with some of those proverbs. We were doing this very same thing you're doing here on the sidelines, having conversations with people for our podcast. And so the leap forward to a few years later, and CivSource, that was a newbie, holds the chair, for me is no small feat.
Of course.
And what I've experienced about this, and therefore when you come to what have I tried to do, is it truly really is family, and the family is growing, right? Otherwise, if families don't grow, they die. And so to the extent that I too was brought in and received by this family is the same way that, together with Evans, the CEO, we've said, how do we continuously grow this family? Because family, community is what helps us be sustainable, right? And I think to the extent that you can't grow, you truly die. And so we have had conversations about, what does growth look like? Who should be members, how and when, how do they enter, how do they not? So membership and growth has been a key part of that. But then as they come, it's what kind of conversations should we have as people in philanthropy in East Africa? And so there's been conversations about what does accountability look like. There's been conversations about, adaptability and the kinds of shaking that the COVID moment enabled us go through. We've really tried to be keen about building leaders that are building the philanthropy movement in East Africa. That's another thing. Research. I think we can never exhaust the data that there is, but also not just, naming things and counting things, but like you said, and what does this tell us? And how do we move the needle? And I know that in Kenya, the network has been, very supportive with working with local civil society around there's a bill, an act in Kenya that is, whose name I'm going to forget, that seeks to control how non-profits register. I know they were very, very keen in that. In Uganda, it was how do we support the Uganda Philanthropy Forum to grow and to become, sturdy, because it's part of the roots of the EAPN in Tanzania. So even in each country context, we've been able to start to build the country philanthropy scene, because that is part of who becomes then our members. So that has been another keen thing. I think for me, because this is my last year, I'll be exiting at the end of this year. One thing I've tried to impress on my colleagues at the board is to say, are we truly counting what the network is worth? Because yes, when the CEO presents to us our book of accounts, what we count is what we've been able to raise for the Secretariat to support the members. And I keep telling the CEO, we're not just the 200,000 that we've been able to get in grants. We are the sum total. That is the strength and power and reach of the network. And I think until we can name and tell that story, we're not yet, in fact, telling the true story of the growth that we see.
And that actually is at the heart of our definitions and maybe even understanding of philanthropy in Africa. If you limit it only to money, then you miss the big part of it. And so I've had this conversation also with finance officers and finance managers. When you are reporting, doing your financial report, they will only focus on money. And I'll say, but what about that contribution that we received from that institution? What about that ticket that I was funded for, etc., etc.? When you compound all those things, you realize that you actually are making more impact through such, as opposed to the actual money that comes through. So I think we really are challenged as African institutions to think differently, even around the three things that you mentioned, accounting and recounting. Because if we continue using Western frameworks, we are going to lose a lot in terms of what African philanthropy looks like. So as we prepare to learn, Jackie, one of the things that we want our viewers and listeners to also get to know is, who is Jackie? Where did it all start? You are a human rights activist, but you are now also in the philanthropy space. But where did it all start? Who is Jackie?
Oh my goodness. How far? Once upon a time. You see, you need to ask that question and we look into a golden globe and tell the story. So
so once upon a time.
there was a reverend and his wife, Anyhow, I'm a firstborn of 5. So that is where my home is, with mom and dad who raised us in the church. My father was an Anglican priest. My mother, a vet, one of the very first vet officers in Kabale. And we keep asking her to tell her story, because it must have been interesting working in a mostly male profession at the time. And being out in the field. Kabale is southwestern Uganda towards the Rwanda border. So being out there supporting farmers to treat their cows. Her particular line of work is cattle, is livestock. So, born and bred and raised in that sort of family setting. The one thing that I credit my parents for is truly allowing us do anything and everything. And so I love music. I love to read. I am very playful, very cheeky. I think if I wasn't doing this work, I'd be acting.
Yeah.
Something just drew me
to
act. Every time I watched a TV, I literally would see which character would I have played if I was acting. But we grew up in an era where, no one was telling us about that acting was a thing. So yeah, I loved traveling. I call myself a travelist, a philanthropist, and fearless. I love to read. I love books.
Yeah.
I love traveling. I love when I'm feeling frazzled, the thing that calms me is either being by water or among trees.
Yeah.
I sometimes think my spirit person was a tree before I landed on this earth, or maybe I will be a tree, who knows? But yeah, there's something just when I'm in a forest, when I look at trees, there's something just so awe-inspiring that fills or feeds my spirit. So that's part of who I am. I am a mother of 2 grown-ups now. One is 21, one is 19. So it's an interesting season of my life that I'm going through right now. They both study in the US and they're in Uganda for summer. So I've been wondering, as I've been coming home late, and I have to keep reminding myself they're adults now. But are adults allowed? Like, what conversation do you have about what time they should come home? Should I even be telling them? So I was like, where do you go to find this information? So anyhow, an interesting moment in my life. I love leaders, and I think that is because I saw my parents truly give their life to growing leaders in the church. I think my rebel side, that fighting for rights and voice, I see from my dad. You cannot tell the fights people have in church, not physical fights, but just ideological fights and stances. He was one of those that wanted to introduce African instruments in the church and being told, no, they're demonic, right? So these kinds of narratives spread not just in philanthropy, in our music, in our literature, across many things. And him, standing up to bishops, which, you can't if you're a priest. How do you talk back to your bishop? So it is from those things, really. My love of music is them. My father we woke up to him playing music to us or singing to us to get us out of bed. So a lot of what I love is my roots. And finally, I am totally passionate about my continent. I believe I'm not African by accident. Africa is home. It's my roots. It is me. It's my blood. It is my identity. And so to have a place that I am connected to my ancestors and to those that are to come, I think it's just, I'm like living my best life. What more would you want?
So on that note, yesterday you said in Uganda, when everything is going well, what do we say? So Jackie, thank you so much. Thank you so much. We end it on that note. We thank you on that note.
Thank you.
That was Jackie Asiimwe, the CEO of CivSource Africa, based in Uganda. Thank you for watching. See you next time.
You've been listening to the CAPSI podcast series, Conversations on African Philanthropy.